How's it going, guys? My name is fallinghurts, and this video acts as my 2022 review for Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. To get some housekeeping out of the way, Hellblade originally released August 2017 on both PS4 and PC, later coming to both Switch and Xbox consoles, the latter of which Microsoft now owns Ninja Theory, the developer. So if you're excited for Hellblade or the franchise as a whole, you may want to consider owning an Xbox or a PC from here on. A little background myself before I get into my gameplay and my experience here for this review. I played originally in January of 2018 on the PS4. And going into this review, the only thing I truly remembered was that the combat was a little basic, but the sound design was really good, especially with a good pair of headphones. Now, given the hype for its sequel, as well as the RTX update that did come to PC as well as next-gen consoles, I felt it was time to return to Helheim with Senua for my first review of 2022. And as always with all of my reviews, this video will feature as little spoilers as possible, and all the gameplay will be shown from about the first hour or so of the game. So jumping straight in, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice is a third-person melee action game with a heavy emphasis on puzzles and psychological storytelling. The protagonist, Senua, actually does suffer from some form of psychosis. I'm not really sure what's going on there. I'm not a psychologist either, so I'm not even going to claim to know. But she hears voices, and they're not always good voices. But all the same, we're going to follow Senua into the depths of Helheim, which is the Viking hell, to redeem the soul, the lost soul of her former lover, Dillion. You can make fun of that name all you want, it's going to be said a million times throughout this game. Now right away, my playthrough, in hindsight, I can say that this game took me about 8.5 hours to complete, and that is 100% completion, all achievements from scratch, and the retail price is $30. So take that for what it is. Usually the game is discounted to less than $10 during any sale, and it's also on Game Pass now. To segment this video into a couple different parts, I would like to clarify the difference of visuals, sound design, as well as gameplay and story, and I'll hit on those in this order. So without further ado, let's hop right in with those visuals. And I've got to say, the first thing you will truly notice in this game is how good the character models are. Senua specifically has so much attention to detail with so many close-ups throughout the game, and this is a very intimate story where you and Senua are truly the main characters. Maybe you, not as a player, as a person, but so as you're experiencing the story through Senua. It won't make sense until you play it yourself, but it's a very outward experience. The only exception to this is when you move around the camera or during photo mode sessions, when you can tell that Senua's face just isn't quite as expression-filled as it is during the cutscenes or during the gameplay when it needs to be. And I've already dropped the pin. There it is. There is a photo mode in this game. I actually didn't know this the first time I played, or it was added after. I'm not entirely sure for that. But the photo mode is serviceable. It's not that good. There's some cool effects in there that are actually pretty cool, like outlining the characters or certain items, and different melting effects that are actually pretty ingenious. But overall, it's a pretty rudimentary photo mode system. Not the best, but you can time some cool shots if you really plan it. But what is really cool about the photo mode isn't the actual system itself, but rather what you're focusing on. In 2021, there was an RTX update for Hellblade. However, the puddles and bodies of water and everything like that got a slight enhancement in their reflections as well as lighting just throughout the world. It helps, but it makes an even bigger issue come up when some textures just don't look quite up to par. As some people would use the expression, it's like putting makeup on like a turd. Some textures just look really, really bad compared to an overall really well-looking game. And this, as well as Senua's face when walking around the world, just take you out of the experience overall, which is really intense otherwise. Continuing to move throughout the world though, however, you will notice that it's not a very large-scale game. By no means is this open world or anything like that, but you will notice that it does keep the environments varied enough that throughout the 8 to 9 hours of playtime that you will get out of this game, you're never going to be completely bored with the environments that you're experiencing. And to throw this on here now, I ran the game just fine with modern hardware, as well as the fact that it was installed on an SSD. This, and you can also include next-gen consoles with this, as to saying that the game has almost no load times whatsoever. However, those moments in the gameplay where the game forces you to walk instead of running and slows you down simply for the sake of loading things is an older system that a lot of games used, especially back during the PS3 era and some into the PS4 era as well, as a way of making the game load without a loading screen, and you can tell that the game is doing this at times as well. And unfortunately though, it is baked into the game. There is no swapping out of that with an SSD. Now, with all of that being said, though, however, I would like to move into the second category, and that is what I believe is the game's greatest strength, and that is the sound design. And really, you need to play this game with headphones. The spatial audio of hearing different voices you know, in front of you to the left, behind you to the right, in front of you to the right, behind you to the left, straight behind you, straight ahead of you. All these different places that these voices could be coming from. Boom, 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 boom. It is insane. The voices alone make it worth it, let alone the fact that overall the game features pretty decent sound design. But truly the voices, as well as other psychotic episodes that happen throughout the game, where there does need to be some level of atmosphere, because the game, believe it or not, is of horror themes at times. It's not always scary. It's definitely one of those games that can be scary without being a full-blown horror game, and that's something that you're definitely going to want to appreciate on a first playthrough. Maybe later on it won't be so much, but it's good. The music is one thing that I would say that over the last couple days I've been thinking about it, and it's not really sticking with me that much. So it doesn't need to. I mean, it probably says something more to the gameplay, that I was more engrossed in that most of the time, but the music didn't really stick with me like a lot of games do. So for what it's worth, I guess I can knock a point here if I really need to, but I think in the moment it really satisfied what it needed to do. Now, between the very good visuals with slight drops and the audio with almost no exception to quality whatsoever, we've got to move into where I believe the game kind of has some stumbles here and there, and that is the gameplay. Hellblade toes the line between two types of games, a puzzle game and a third-person combat game. One is insanely deep and very interesting, while the other is exceptionally boring and feels very muddled. Starting with the bad though, however, I've got to say that the combat in this game overstays its welcome within the first 3 hours. This is one thing that I can say for Hellblade Senua Saga, the sequel. I really hope does get expanded, even though this wasn't the main focus of this game, I do have to say. It does seem like this could be more of a potential for the sequel. The combat isn't super grand, and while it does feature only a light and heavy attack, as well as like a kick and a block, it's not that deep, although it sounds like it could be. And part of the reason for this is the enemy variety. There is hardly any. The bosses are the exception to the rule, and I've got to say, the final boss fight sucks. So picture this, throughout the game, you're facing very few trickle in of new types of enemies, and eventually that does stagnate. The only exception to the rules are the boss fights, which actually are pretty front-loaded, and then towards the end of the game as well, like a marathon almost, and the final boss fight is absolutely atrocious. It's a rehash of everything you've fought so far, and it's very bland, and it even looks less interesting. In hindsight, what I believe Ninja Theory thought their saving grace would be was another mechanic that I haven't divulged yet, and that is the rot or corruption system that you do go through. Every time you die in this game, Senua becomes a little bit more corrupted, and you can see this through her arm. It goes up her body, and eventually the game does warn you that if you die too many times, Senua will fail her quest. Honestly, no spoilers here, I don't even know if you can fail. This game's too easy to fail, and that is combat alone pretty much. There are hardly any other scenarios in this game where you can die. There are a few puzzle scenarios exceptions, but I'll leave those for a different conversation. And while I do have an overall negative outlook on the combat as a whole, I do recognize that it was very important to add this in between the better portion of this game's gameplay, and that is the puzzles. Now, again, I will say I believe the combat was necessary for this game for pacing's sake. I think this game does it very well if you can get past how bad the combat is. Now, moving into the puzzles, I have nothing but praises for the puzzles of this game. They're all very unique and interesting. They build upon previous puzzles, and usually chapter by chapter, they each have a different type of solution, whether that be walking through this kind of ominous circle thing that makes it to where the world is in a different state once you go through it, or even just lining up beams to make a certain shape or rune that you need to unlock a door. But these all pale in comparison to some of the puzzles that are later in the game that I'm not going to spoil on concept alone, but let's just say they're a little more involved in the way you react with your character, as well as the fact that they play into the tropes of horror and different things like that, and when you find them, they are a treat in the gameplay. One thing, though, that I can say about every puzzle in this game is you're going to feel satisfied when you complete it. There's never like a bore, dull moment with the puzzles, in a way that I feel the combat drags on every bit. Now, another way that this game can be satisfying is that it's an easy 100% completion rate. You can do this in one playthrough if you need to. The only collectible in this game are lore stones, and they're marked in the game if you've completed them all, and you can always go back through chapter select and get the ones you're missing, because it tells you exactly which chapter you need to go to. Otherwise, all other achievements for this game are based on progression of the main story, so one playthrough will get you 13 out of 14 achievements, and as long as you've gotten all those lore stones, you'll easily get that last one. But I've tiptoed around it long enough. Let's get into that final segment, the story. And before I even begin with my thoughts on the story of Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice, I wanted to kind of bring up an article that I saw floating around with the headline that Xbox wants Hellblade Senua's Saga, or this Hellblade franchise, to be their God of War. And while that's all fine and good, I think that misses the mark a little bit. I don't think it needs to be God of War. I mean, it is based on setting alone right now, but I think what they should shoot for, and what they have done so far in the first Hellblade, is Xbox's Control, the Remedy game. Another article I'd like to source is one talking about how Hellblade worked with a less than $10 million budget for the first game, and how they did a lot of their cutscenes in their boardroom because they couldn't afford a mocap studio. Now, I promise there is a point to all this, because one thing I want to say about the cutscenes of the game is that they merge both in-game cinematics, motion capture, as well as live action superimposed videos into the game. Something that Remedy likes to do, and something that not a lot of developers even are willing to do. And this game does it so well and so tastefully that it's not off-putting in any way, shape, or form. The story delivery is always really personal to Senua, who is the only character we're truly supposed to know and feel for in this game. Overall, though, the story isn't the most amazing thing in the world. It's definitely a story of overcoming your own self-doubts. But I've got to say that the story does feel very unusual and fragmented, but in a weird way, due to how the game is kind of paced, it kind of works in the favor of the storytelling, as well as the themes of the game match it pretty well. I previously mentioned in this review that a lot of times that Senua is strictly speaking to the camera itself. It feels very personal, and it almost feels like you're a part of that character, and it works really well. The motion capture as well as the character models really shine here, and I wanted to point out that the direction and just overall the camera angles, they're creepy at times. They make you uneasy, unnerved, and I think that's kind of what the game wants you to feel at times. And some of that cinematography paired with those visuals as well as the audio really do come together to make some incredible atmosphere for the story to be told in. Another instance, throughout the world you'll notice little eyeballs in the trees that aren't really there, or the world looking like it's moving and wavy when it's really not, are just other ways that the game makes you feel completely unnerved. And throughout the game, if you really pay attention, you'll notice visual changes like that take place as Senua becomes more or less confident in herself and her mission to save her lover. But with these little tiny details making such a big impact on the story and the way you can experience it, I don't think this story is for everyone. It's not in your face, but it is very immersive. You're going to feel like you're along with Senua on this journey. There isn't ever a straight up story to tell other than Senua trying to, redeem the soul of her former lover Dillion. However, there is plenty to infer between the parallels between Senua and her father and her mother, as well as the Dillion plotline at times, and the lore stones that are collected throughout the game are also a secondary form of storytelling by a character named Druth, who seems to be a character Senua knew before, but she is now completely imagining or maybe simply remembering the tales that he tells as a way of calming her. But they always kind of have a parallel to the Norse mythology that they're calling upon for the story itself. So with the culmination of absolutely everything, I've got to say that the game, if you enjoy the storytelling that's there, the not always in your face, but very immersive storytelling, as well as the incredible visuals and audio design, all immersing you into this story of Senua going down into the depths of hell, basically sacrificing her own life to free the soul of her lover, then I can honestly say that I believe the payoff at the end of the game is one that's really well, and it has me really excited for the sequel. So for the price that it is, and everything included, I can say that I do recommend Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice. It's a great game to play, even if you never intend to play the sequel. For instance, if you're a hardcore PlayStation player or Switch or however, I don't know how the game's going to end up coming out for sure. Don't take my word as gospel, but it's not worth it to not play this game, especially when it's on Game Pass. You can get the game for super cheap, I believe less than $10 in a Steam sale. I'm sure the same goes for PlayStation, Xbox, maybe even Switch, I do believe. I really just wanted to take a moment to gush about this game. I feel like everyone who's going to play this game has played it at this point, but it's something I've got to say I really enjoyed. I'm really excited for the sequel, and maybe if you're excited to hear about that too, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. Bye.